November 15th, 2000. Raleigh, North Carolina, 10:30 p.m. Eric Miller pulls into his driveway after a night out bowling with friends, his stomach churning with nausea that makes the short drive home feel like an eternity. He's 30 years old, a pediatric AIDS researcher at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And he's never felt this sick in his entire life. Not even close. His hands tremble as he grips the steering wheel, trying to steady himself enough to walk from the car to the front door. Sweat beads on his forehead despite the cool November air. His vision swims slightly, everything just a bit off kilter in a way that makes him wonder if he's caught some terrible flu. His wife Anne meets him at the door, her face painted with concern as she watches him stumble inside. To anyone observing, she looks like the picture of a devoted spouse, worried, caring, ready to help her sick husband in any way she can. Within minutes, he's doubled over the toilet, vomiting so violently that his whole body shakes. The nausea is relentless, waves of it crashing over him without mercy. His head pounds with a pain that feels like his skull is splitting open. His temperature spikes dangerously high. Cold sweats soak through his shirt, then his undershirt, leaving him shivering despite the fever. Anne insists they go to the emergency room. She helps him to the car, steady and supportive, her arm around his waist as he leans heavily against her. She's playing the role of worried wife perfectly. And why wouldn't she? This is the performance of her life. What Eric doesn't know, what he can't possibly know, is that the woman holding his arm right now, the woman who promised to love him in sickness and in health just a few years ago, the mother of his 11-month-old daughter sleeping peacefully upstairs, is the reason he's sick. She's the one who put poison in his system. She's the one who's been making him ill for months. She's the one who has decided that he needs to go away. And she's not going to stop until he's gone. This is the story of how a brilliant pharmaceutical scientist used her knowledge of chemistry to slowly poison her husband to death. How she almost got away with the perfect crime. And how a single strand of hair became the evidence that exposed months of calculated, methodical ending of life. 5 years earlier, Eric and Anne Miller seem to have it all figured out. They meet at Purdue University as undergraduates. Two brilliant chemistry students with bright futures ahead of them. Eric is passionate about science in the purest sense. He wants to make a real difference, to save lives, to contribute something meaningful to the world. Anne is equally intelligent, equally driven, but her motivations run in a slightly different direction. She likes nice things. She appreciates the finer aspects of life. They fall in love, get married, and move to Raleigh in 1992 to pursue graduate degrees at North Carolina State University. Eric gets his PhD in 1998 and immediately faces a choice. Take a high-paying job at a major pharmaceutical company or pursue his passion for pediatric AIDS research through a federal grant. Eric chooses the research because that's who Eric is, idealistic, committed to making the world better, willing to sacrifice personal wealth for a greater cause. Living on a researcher's salary means the Millers don't have much. They can't afford the big house Anne wants. They can't buy the nice cars she admires. They don't have a boat or take expensive vacations. For Eric, this is fine. He's doing work that matters. In January 2000, Anne gives birth to their daughter, Claire. The financial pressure intensifies. Anne abandons her own PhD studies and takes a high-paying job as a research scientist at GlaxoSmithKline, one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies with a major research facility in Research Triangle Park. From the outside, they look like the perfect family. A brilliant scientist working to cure pediatric AIDS. his equally brilliant wife developing life-saving pharmaceuticals, their beautiful baby daughter, the American dream playing out in North Carolina's Research Triangle. But behind closed doors, cracks are forming in the perfect facade. Working at GlaxoSmithKline, Anne meets Daryl Willard, a colleague in the research division. He's married with children, just like Anne. But that doesn't stop what happens next. The affair begins sometime in 2000, and it's not a casual fling. Phone records will later reveal over 500 calls between Anne and Daryl in the weeks leading up to Eric's death. Emails seized from Anne's work computer burn with passion. Intimate messages, declarations of love, plans for a future together. In early November 2000, just days before Eric first gets sick, Anne and Daryl fly to Chicago for what they claim is a business trip. They check into the Ritz-Carlton, registering as husband and wife. They order room service. They act like newlyweds on a honeymoon. Meanwhile, Eric is back in Raleigh, working in his lab, trying to find a cure for pediatric AIDS, completely unaware that his wife is living a double life. But here's what makes this even more disturbing. Daryl isn't the only man Anne is involved with. While conducting her affair with Daryl, she's simultaneously maintaining relationships with other men, including a lover in California. Think about that for a second. Anne isn't just cheating on Eric. She's living multiple secret lives, spinning webs of deception so complex that even when Eric starts getting suspicious, he can't quite piece together what's really happening. By November 2000, Eric knows something is wrong. Anne is coming home late from work. Her explanations don't add up. Eric starts driving around town looking for her when she doesn't come home. He's not confrontational by nature, but he's starting to ask questions that Anne doesn't want to answer. And that's when Eric's health problems begin. November 15th, 2000. The bowling alley in Raleigh is crowded with people enjoying a typical Wednesday night. Eric is there with some friends, and among them is Daryl Willard, Anne's lover, though Eric doesn't know that yet. Daryl offers to buy Eric a beer. It's a friendly gesture, or at least it seems that way. Eric accepts, thanking him for the drink. The first sip tastes wrong. Bitter, metallic, unnatural. Eric mentions it to his friends. This beer tastes weird, but he doesn't want to seem ungrateful, so he keeps drinking. Within an hour, he's violently ill. The nausea hits like a freight train. He stumbles to the bathroom, clutching a trash can, his face drained of all color. His friends watch in horror as this healthy 30-year-old man transforms into someone who can barely stand up. One detail witnesses will remember later: Daryl's face when Eric complained about the bitter taste. Witnesses say Daryl went pale, almost ashen. And when Eric set the beer down, Daryl quickly knocked it over, spilling the remaining contents, almost like he was desperate to prevent Eric from drinking anymore. The ambulance arrives and rushes Eric to the hospital. Doctors run tests, trying to figure out what's causing his symptoms. They can't find anything definitive. His blood work shows some abnormalities, but nothing that explains the severity of his illness. Eric spends several days in intensive care, slowly improving. The doctors are baffled but relieved when he's well enough to discharge. They send him home with instructions to rest and follow up if symptoms return. Anne plays the devoted wife throughout his hospital stay. She's at his bedside constantly, holding his hand, bringing him comfort. To the nursing staff, she seems like the perfect spouse: concerned, attentive, loving. What nobody knows is that Eric's blood work from this hospital stay showed elevated levels of arsenic. But those results take time to process, time to analyze, time to confirm. By the time the lab results come back a week later, it will be too late. November 30th, 2000. 15 days after the bowling alley incident. Eric is home, recovering from what everyone assumes was a severe case of food poisoning or maybe a virus. He's still not feeling great, but he's functional. He's able to work a bit, spend time with baby Claire, try to get back to normal life. Anne prepares dinner for them that evening. Just the two of them, a quiet meal at home while their daughter sleeps. Eric trusts his wife completely. Why wouldn't he? She's the mother of his child. She's a scientist, someone who understands the importance of health and safety. He eats the meal she prepared. And within hours, he's back in the emergency room. This time, in critical condition. The symptoms are similar to before, but magnified tenfold. Violent vomiting, agonizing abdominal pain, fever spiking dangerously high. His organs are beginning to shut down. Doctors admit him immediately and start running every test they can think of. And this time, when they do a routine urine analysis, they find something that makes their blood run cold. Astronomical levels of arsenic in his system. Not just trace amounts. Not levels that could be explained by environmental exposure. Levels so high they could end multiple people. The hospital immediately contacts the Raleigh Police Department. Detectives arrive, but by the time they get there, it's December 2nd, 2000, and Eric Miller is gone. He's 30 years old. He's died in excruciating pain as arsenic destroyed his body from the inside out. The toxicology report reveals something even more disturbing. Eric hadn't just been poisoned once. He'd been receiving small doses of arsenic for approximately 5 months before his death. Someone had been systematically poisoning him for months, creating a pattern of chronic illness that would mask the final lethal dose. Think about what that means. For 5 months, someone watched Eric get sick, helped him through his symptoms, maybe even comforted him during his worst moments, all while being the source of his illness. That level of calculated cruelty requires a special kind of broken. The investigation begins. Detectives immediately focus on Anne Miller. And for good reason. She had exclusive access to Eric during the entire time he was being poisoned. She prepared his meals. She had access to his drinks. She was there during every episode of illness. But whenever police try to question her, Anne breaks down in tears. She's too distraught to talk, too devastated by her husband's death to provide a statement. She lawyers up almost immediately, just 2 days after Eric dies. On December 4th, investigators execute a search warrant at Anne's workstation at GlaxoSmithKline. What they find changes everything: sodium cacodylate, an arsenic compound used in research laboratories, the same type of arsenic that ended Eric Miller's life. And Anne had direct access to it in her lab. But the physical evidence is just the beginning. When investigators examine Anne's work computer, they discover emails that reveal her affair with Darryl Willard. The messages are intimate, passionate, planning a future together. The timeline shows they flew to Chicago together just days before Eric first got sick. More phone records come in. Over 500 calls between Anne and Darryl in the weeks before Eric's death. These aren't quick work conversations. These are long, intimate exchanges between lovers. The evidence starts pointing in one direction. Anne Miller had the means, the motive, and the opportunity to poison her husband. And her lover, Darryl Willard, might have helped her do it. On January 21st, 2001, Raleigh police execute a search warrant at Darryl Willard's home. They confiscate documents, 2 computers, records of trips, anything that might connect him to Eric Miller's poisoning. Darryl knows what's coming. He can see the walls closing in. The police suspect him. His wife now knows about the affair. His entire life is collapsing. The next day, January 22nd, Darrell Willard's wife comes home to find him in their garage. He's taken his own life with a gun. Next to his body is a suicide note that proclaims his innocence in Eric's death, but takes full responsibility for his own destruction. But before he went away, Darrell had met with his attorney, Rick Gammon. And in that meeting, protected by attorney-client privilege, Darrell revealed something that would eventually lead to Ann's arrest. Darrell told his lawyer that Ann had admitted something to him. While Eric was hospitalized during his first bout of illness in November, Ann had visited him. And during that visit, while Eric lay in his hospital bed, weak and vulnerable and trusting his wife to care for him, Ann had injected something into his IV line, an unnamed substance, directly into his bloodstream. Think about that. Eric was in the hospital, surrounded by doctors and nurses, believing he was getting better. And his own wife poisoned him right there in the hospital room. For years, Rick Gammon is bound by attorney-client privilege. Even though his client is gone, even though he knows information that could solve a case, he can't reveal what Darrell told him. The law protects those conversations. But Ann's attorney makes a critical mistake during pre-trial proceedings. He claims that Darrell had been manipulating Ann, that she was the victim of his schemes. That opens a legal door. By claiming Darrell victimized Ann, her defense team inadvertently allows prosecutors to pierce attorney-client privilege regarding third-party crimes, crimes committed against the client by someone else. In May 2004, after a lengthy legal battle that goes all the way to the North Carolina Supreme Court, Rick Gammon is ordered to reveal what Darrell told him about Ann's actions. The testimony is devastating. Gammon takes the stand and explains that Darrell learned from Ann that she had injected poison into Eric's IV during his hospital stay. When asked why she would do such a thing, Ann's explanation, according to what Darrell told his attorney, defies all comprehension. She wanted him gone. She wanted to be free. She wanted to avoid the stigma and complications of divorce. And in her twisted calculation, ending his life was the cleaner solution. On September 27, 2004, nearly 4 years after Eric's death, Ann Miller is indicted for first-degree ending of life. She's remarried by this point, took her new husband's name, Conce, moved to Wilmington with her and Eric's daughter, Claire, and tried to build a new life. That new life ends when she walks into the Wake County Public Safety Center and is placed in handcuffs. While the investigation unfolds, forensic scientists are conducting a remarkable analysis that will prove definitively that Ann poisoned Eric systematically over months. During Eric's autopsy, the medical examiner followed standard procedure and preserved tissue samples, including hair. Hair is a remarkable forensic tool because it grows continuously, creating a permanent record of everything that enters the body. Each strand is like a timeline, documenting exposure to drugs, toxins, and poisons. Scientists use a technique called neutron activation analysis to examine Eric's hair. They cut it into tiny sections, each piece just 5 millimeters long, representing approximately 2 weeks of growth. Then they bombard each section with neutrons in a nuclear reactor, which causes the arsenic atoms to become radioactive and emit gamma rays that can be precisely measured. The results are stunning. When graphed, Eric's hair doesn't show one massive spike of arsenic from a single poisoning event. Instead, it shows multiple distinct peaks spread across months. Clear evidence of repeated, deliberate poisoning episodes starting as far back as May or June 2000. The pattern is unmistakable. Someone had been giving Eric arsenic in small doses for months, creating a medical history of mysterious illness. Then, in November, that someone dramatically increased the dosage. First at the bowling alley, then again at the final dinner, ensuring the ending would come. This wasn't a crime of passion. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was calculated, methodical, scientific ending. Anne used her knowledge of chemistry and pharmacology to orchestrate the perfect crime. Almost perfect. Anne Miller Kuntz's trial is scheduled to begin in January 2006. Prosecutors are prepared to present overwhelming evidence. The arsenic compound from her workplace, the affair with Darryl, the phone records, the emails, the attorney's testimony about the IV injection, and the hair analysis proving systematic poisoning. But in November 2005, just weeks before trial, Anne's legal team negotiates a plea deal. She pleads guilty to second-degree ending of life and conspiracy to commit first-degree ending. In exchange, she receives 25 to 31.5 years in prison, 2 consecutive sentences that ensure she won't be eligible for parole until 2029, when she'll be at least 60 years old. Her attorney reads a statement in court on her behalf. I feel a deep sense of remorse and regret for Eric's death. I will struggle for the rest of my life with how this could have happened. I have asked God to forgive me. The words ring hollow to Eric's family, who sit in the courtroom watching the woman who ended their son accept the plea deal. Eric's father, Varys Miller, is blunt in his assessment. She wants forgiveness. Where's the forgiveness been for the last 5 years? She's sorry. She's sorry she got caught. The plea deal spares Eric's family from enduring a lengthy trial. It spares them from hearing every gruesome detail of how their son was slowly tortured to death. It spares them from seeing crime scene photos and medical evidence and listening to expert witnesses describe exactly how arsenic destroys the human body. But it also means many questions will never be answered. Anne never fully explains her actions. She never details exactly how many times she poisoned Eric or what her original plan was. She never expresses genuine remorse beyond the carefully worded statement her lawyer reads. District Attorney Cologne Willoughby explains the decision to accept the plea. The case was largely circumstantial. There were some legal frailties that could have caused problems on appeal. And the plea deal guaranteed Anne would spend decades in prison rather than risking an acquittal. It's not perfect justice, but it's justice nonetheless. Anne Miller Kuntz is still in prison today. Now approximately 67, 68 years old, she's serving her sentence at the North Carolina Correctional Institution for Women in Raleigh. Some sources say Noose Correctional Institution in Goldsboro. The prison system may have transferred her. Her projected release date is September 2029, when she'll be around 72 years old. She'll have served nearly 24 years behind bars for ending the life of the man who loved her, trusted her, and gave her a daughter. The daughter, Claire Miller. That's perhaps the most heartbreaking aspect of this entire case. Claire was only 11 months old when her mother began systematically poisoning her father. She has no memories of Eric, no recollection of the father who adored her, who was working to save children from AIDS while his own child's mother was planning his death. After Anne's arrest, a custody battle erupted. Eric's parents, Varys and Doris Miller, fought for custody of their granddaughter. Eventually, they reached an agreement to share custody with Anne's family. But what about Anne's relationship with Claire? That became its own legal battle. At one point, Anne sought visitation rights with her daughter from prison. A court-appointed expert was tasked with determining whether such visits would be in Claire's best interest. The records don't clearly indicate the final outcome. But given the nature of Anne's crime and Claire's age at the time, it's likely any visitation was severely restricted or denied entirely. Claire would be about 24, 25 years old now. A young woman trying to build her life while carrying the burden of knowing her mother ended her father. How do you process that? How do you reconcile the fact that the woman who gave you life also took life from the man who helped create you? Anne's second marriage, the one that happened after Eric's death but before her arrest, obviously didn't survive her conviction. That husband's name has been kept mostly out of public records, likely because he had nothing to do with Eric's ending and wanted to distance himself from the notoriety. In prison, Anne has maintained a relatively low profile. Unlike some high-profile cases where criminals seek attention or grant interviews, Anne has largely remained silent. She's never done a detailed interview explaining her actions. She's never provided the full truth about what drove her to poison Eric or exactly how many times she administered arsenic. The case was featured on CBS's 48 Hours Mystery in 2009 in an episode titled Toxic. The show interviewed Eric's family and the lead detectives, but couldn't get Anne to participate. She declined all interview requests. Author and prosecutor turned true crime writer later examined the case in detail, and Anne again refused to cooperate. She seems content to serve her sentence in obscurity, avoiding the spotlight that would force her to confront the full horror of what she did. The Anne Miller Kantz case represents a particularly chilling category of crime: intimate partner poisoning by someone with scientific knowledge. Anne wasn't some desperate person acting in a moment of passion or fear. She was a highly educated pharmaceutical scientist who understood exactly what she was doing. She knew how arsenic worked in the human body. She knew what symptoms it would cause. She knew the progression of arsenic poisoning, how it would attack the gastrointestinal system first, causing vomiting and diarrhea, how it would then move to the cardiovascular system, potentially causing heart failure, how accumulated doses would damage the liver and kidneys. She knew how long it would take to end someone. She knew how to make it look like a mysterious illness rather than deliberate ending. She used her education, the same education Eric supported her in getting, the same field they bonded over when they first met at Purdue, as a weapon against him. The motive wasn't even primarily financial. Eric only had modest life insurance, certainly not enough to justify the risk of ending someone's life. The real motive was avoiding the consequences of her own actions. She'd been caught having affairs. Eric was getting suspicious, driving around town looking for her when she claimed to be working late. She faced exposure, divorce, custody battles, the social stigma of being a cheating wife who destroyed her family for an affair with a married coworker. In her twisted cost-benefit analysis, ending Eric's life seemed like the easier path. As a widow, she'd receive sympathy, support, and full custody of Claire with no questions asked. As a divorced woman caught in an affair, she'd face judgment, potential loss of custody, child support obligations, and the complete dismantling of the perfect life she'd carefully constructed. Think about what that reveals about her psychology. Most people, when caught in affairs, feel guilt, remorse, fear of hurting their spouse. They might end the affair immediately, beg for forgiveness, agree to marriage counseling, or accept divorce as a painful but necessary consequence of their actions. Anne chose ending of life, not in a moment of passion or rage, but methodically, scientifically, over months. And she chose the cruelest method possible: slow poisoning that made Eric suffer repeatedly for months before the final lethal dose. She watched him get sick. She took him to the hospital. She comforted him through his symptoms, all while knowing she was the cause. The forensic breakthroughs in this case have had lasting impact on criminal investigations worldwide. The neutron activation analysis of hair samples has become a standard technique in poisoning investigations. The case is taught in forensic science programs as a landmark example of how biological evidence can reveal patterns of systematic poisoning even after death. The legal battle over attorney-client privilege also set important precedents about when that privilege can be pierced in cases involving third-party crimes. Courts now reference the Miller case when determining whether an attorney must reveal information about crimes committed against their client. But perhaps the most important legacy of this case is a stark reminder that intelligence and education don't equal morality. Ann Miller was brilliant, smart enough to get into prestigious universities like Purdue and NC State, smart enough to work for one of the world's largest pharmaceutical companies, smart enough to understand complex chemistry and pharmacology, smart enough to nearly pull off what she believed was the perfect crime. She just wasn't smart enough to predict that Eric's hair would tell the story she tried so desperately to hide. She wasn't smart enough to realize that forensic science would advance far enough to detect patterns of poisoning in tiny hair segments. She wasn't smart enough to control her accomplice's guilty conscience. She wasn't smart enough to realize that her perfect crime had fatal flaws. Eric Miller was 30 years old when he went away. He was working to cure pediatric AIDS, dedicating his life to trying to save children. He was a devoted father to his infant daughter, who would never remember him. He was, by all accounts, a kind, gentle, idealistic person who believed passionately in making the world better through science. His wife ended him because it was more convenient than divorce. Ann Miller Kantz will be in her 70s when she's released from prison, if she lives that long. She'll have spent the majority of her adult life behind bars, isolated from her daughter, marked forever as someone who poisoned her own husband. The brilliant career she could have had, the life of comfort she craved so desperately, the freedom she valued so highly, all of it sacrificed for a crime that was never as perfect as she believed. And justice, slow and methodical as the poisoning itself, finally caught up.